Welcome to module number 14 of week 4 of the MOOC on economics of gender and development. In this week, in the very first module, we have discussed about the social systems and how it relates to the question of gender, and also how it actually reflects the different forms of inequality that we find usually in the society with respect to gender relations. In this module, we are going to discuss about the kinship and its role in forming and shaping different forms of gender relations, and also its connection to gender inequality. So, before we begin, we need to understand that what is kinship. In a large context, kinship refers to the system of social relationships that connect people through blood, which we call normally the descendants, the marriage or adoption. It defines how individuals are related to one another in the society, and at the same time it also determines the rights, duties, roles and obligations among them. In simple terms, kinship can be described as the way people are connected as a family in the society, and as such we can say that the way we have the relations like parents, the children, siblings, relatives, which are formed by marriages and also the extended family, all will be covered under the term called kinship. If we look at the features of kinship, then we will find that it is based on the relationship formed by birth, marriage or social recognition. It will also include how it organizes the family life and social behavior. It determines the inheritance, marriage rules and social obligations, different forms and types of social obligations that individuals have in the society, and it can vary across culture, society and also the different communities. So therefore, in a sense, that kinship is something which is the foundation for forming the society and its structure. Many sociologists have tried to articulate what kinship means by looking at different key ideas and also focusing on some of the themes. And in this slide, some of the very important sociological definitions of kinships are provided, and you can see that there are some 6 definitions which are often cited about the kinship which are being given, and it starts with the definition way back. It was defined in 1950s, what is kinship, by Radcliffe and Brown, and then you have the definition given by Malinowski, then Fortis, then Levi-Strauss, and then also the Kinsler-Davies and Nimkoff and Osborne. So these are the definitions, and here you will see how they have tried to articulate what kinship means by focusing on different key ideas. For instance, suppose Radcliffe Brown has emphasized on the key idea as a structured social system. Similarly, if you look at the Malinowski's definition, he tried to sort of articulate kinship in the form of functional aspects of kinship, where he tried to focus on role of kinship in fulfilling the needs and social obligations. Similarly, Levi-Strauss tried to define kinship as a system of exchange, particularly the exchange of women between the groups. So it actually tries to focus on marriage as the foundational form of kinship. And similarly, if you look at suppose Nimkoff, the definition, he tried to sort of articulate and emphasized on the institutional nature of kinship, and then it focused on the regulation of the family roles, that how families are organized, how different individuals are related to each other within a family, and how they operate and how they behave. So these are some of the sociological definitions which we normally find in the textbook of sociology and behavioral sciences, and this is how kinship is defined. If we look at the different definitions, besides these six definitions which we have highlighted, and then we will try to, we can see that there are some common features in all the definitions of kinship. We have six such common features, and these are as follows. In the first place, it emphasizes, definitions of kinship emphasize on the biological basis of it. And most of the scholars agree that kinship originates from the blood relation and relations of reproduction. So therefore, this is the key and a foundational aspect of kinship. It comes through the blood relation. Second form or second feature of kinship, which is more common among all the definitions, relates to the social construction. That kinship and its aspects are usually or commonly a social construct. It's not merely biological, even though it is foundational, but at the same time, the other kinds of expectation, other kinds of anticipations regarding kinship are shaped by different social norms and culture. Third point that we need to understand is that within the definition of kinship, marriage forms as a central phenomena in all the definitions. Marriage plays a crucial role in expanding kinship network. That if you go on having the marital relations, you are expanding the relations as well, which can be counted as kinship relations. And then it has got the functional importance that kinship regulates the rule of the society, how the society and individuals will behave and they operate, and it also provides a sense of authority. It offers this range of social obligations. It regulates the inheritances laws regarding the assets and property and so on and so forth. The fifth aspect is the universality, that kinship exists in all societies, even though they can vary from the society to society as well as from community to community, but nonetheless it is existent in all the societies, so there is a universality regarding the kinship. And lastly, that everybody will agree that it actually forms the basis of family, lineage and clan system, and that is why it is something which is foundational, essential for social structure. So these are the six common features of kinship: that biological basis, social construction, marriage at the core, functional significance, universality, and foundational aspect of social structure. Now, why do we need to understand this kinship relations, and also how does it relate to gender? Because the kinship system shapes gender roles. It guides and regulates the rights, power relations, and also access to the resources that you have in terms of being male or female. Very simply, the kinship determines who is considered as the head of the family, for example, who can inherit property, including that is starting from the land and other immovable and movable property. And it also tries to regulate that who are going to perform the domestic and the reproductive and non-productive work. And then finally, it will also decide that who has the authority and decision-making power when it comes to the family or household or society. So therefore, in a sense, that it is essential that kinship guides the different roles and rights and power relations, and that is why it is essential to understand how it operates in a society and at household level. If we go deeply into the kinship relations, then we will find that in most of the traditional societies, including that of India, we have the kinship structures which are hugely patriarchal. And we have already discussed what does patriarchy mean and how patriarchy works and functions within the society and also within the household. So therefore, essentially, what we have the kinship relations which are mostly patriarchal in nature, and then this has been placing men historically over a privileged position, and then also systematically disadvantaging women within the family, within the household, within the society. And because of this, that these relations are placing men over women, putting men over privileged position and putting women over disadvantaged position. That is why these relations are characterized as something patriarchal. We can see some of the things here in the slide, that for example, if we try to look at the descendant, the lineage, then it is always through the father, and that is why it is called patrilineal. In most of the societies, there are some exceptions. Barring those exceptions, the most of the societies, you have the patrilineal descendants. And then we have the patrilocal, aspect as well. By patrilocal, we mean that after marriage, it is the husband's family where women has to move. So therefore, the women changes from one place to another. She goes to husband's family. Property usually passes through the male line, and that is why when we were women, mostly either your rights for the property is being denied, or when you move to husband's place, then you also lose rights over the paternal property and then become dependent on the husband's family. And then marriage strengthens this patriarchal kinship by reinforcing these norms and values, and that is why it increases the women's dependency on the men, and that is precisely because of which even if you have the divorce or separation, it stigmatizes and affects adversely women more than men, because when they are divorced or separated, then since she was supposed to be dependent on the man, so therefore when getting divorced, she is becoming more vulnerable, and you become more traumatized than men. And it also results in the withdrawal of education and labor market because of the marriage. So it always puts women at the the vulnerable position compared to the men. So this is how the kinship operates, and this is the marriage plays a central role within this kinship relations. We can see some of the special aspects of it in terms of the inheritance and property rights. We can see that why do we need the property rights, and then why it is essential for economic independence or autonomy, and also the empowerment. And then history takes you back to the philosophy of liberalism and then philosophy of rights over property. When 18th century, the people thought of the liberalism in a much broader way, then how to put in place the liberalism into practice. It was decided that you have to give the private property as something which is an ideal, because all the properties were supposed to be divided, rights over the property supposed to be divided among the individuals so that they become empowered. And that is why it is one of the indicators of liberation, it is one of the indicators of empowerment. So therefore, we need to understand that how these property rights are being regulated. And if we look at the kinship and its relation to the laws of inheritance and property rights, then we will find that normally the sons inherit the ancestral property, daughters excluded are, and then also even if they are given, they are always given a smaller share. Property stays within the main lineage, and these often discriminate against the women. And there are some progress in place. For instance, suppose in 2005 in India, when there is an amendment to the Hindu Succession Act, they tried to grant the daughters equal rights as ancestral property, and that is in law. But at the same time, because of social pressure or because of the family, the relations, maintaining the family relations, the women normally do not exercise these rights, and then status quo is maintained. Therefore, in a sense, the kinship norms override the legal equality, and then that is why they affect and maintain the gender inequality so far the property rights are concerned. We can also see the effect of the kinship and reproductive choices. Kinship system, as we have already discussed, they regulate the marriage choices. It also regulates the sexual and behavior, the reproduction. For instance, suppose in India, if we look at the certain parts of the country, then we will find the instances of honor killing, and then also the intercaste or interreligious marriages are not encouraged. There are restrictions. and then also there is a greater surveillance on women's mobility. Therefore, because of this, they try to control. Why this is essential? Because they try to maintain the caste purity, they try to maintain the lineage and inheritance, so there is no disturbances and distortions, and they preserve the family honor. So women and their bodies become the symbols of family and caste honor. So that is the whole idea of kinship and reproductive choices. Alright, so now there are certain exceptions and changes. We need to understand that even though it is universal, not necessarily all the forms of kinships are same. There can be exceptions and there can be changes. So we have interesting examples in the Indian society. For instance, suppose in Meghalaya we have matrilineal Khasi societies, and also there is an example in Kerala where Nayars are supposed to be or known to be the matrilineal society. And when we have this matrilineal society, then we have the features like descendant to mother, that is why it is called matrilineal. Property passes to the daughter as well, and then when there is a marriage, then normally the man moves to the women's place, and then you have the greater autonomy in terms of social choices and some social behavior. So there are some exceptions and there are some changes as well. But at the same time, we need to understand that even though there are some exceptions and there are certain changes taking place over the period, but a man still continues to hold the political power, and patriarchy persists in different forms. It can be nuanced, but at the same time it is there. So that is why understanding kinship becomes very important. We need to understand that kinship is not a neutral social institution. It is one of the most powerful mechanisms through which gender inequality is produced, maintained and legitimized and reproduced. Women's economic choices are restricted by the family honor, the caste norms, the marital status, the responsibilities of family and other things. And these restrictions include the limited mobility of women over different spaces. There is a preference for more home-based work. Women are usually discouraged to go for the male occupations or even the occupations where male dominate. And then even if you want to go somewhere, then still there is a requirement of male permission. So therefore, understanding kinship is essential to understand the gender inequality in the society, especially in India. Alright, so the idea of kinship and its implication for economic understanding is required. And why do we need to understand the kinship as an explicit category for understanding the economic reality? We can take a couple of examples here. Let us examine the implication for the neoclassical optimality of consumer when kinship is explicitly brought into the framework. We will recall that neoclassical model assumes that individuals are rational, they maximize their utility, and they have full control over their income and resources. Decisions are individual and they are autonomous, not influenced by anything, and this is purely coming from the individual. Preferences are given and they are independent as well. Markets are neutral and resource allocation is entirely based on the prices, income and preferences only. So these are the set of standard assumptions within which we try to analyze different choices made by different economic agents, whether it is consumer or producer. Let us put forward an economic problem like this, and this has been done in our first micro classes. We have an utility function like u is equal to x and y, a function of x and y where x and y are two commodities, and you try to maximize your utility by consuming a part of x and part of y and then combining the combination of these two commodities, and then you are subject to a budget constraint which is given by your income and then which is equal to price of x multiplied by amount of x plus price of y multiplied by amount of y. So this is your budget constraints, and which tries to distribute your income over two commodities given their prices, and then given this constraint you try to maximize your utility by consuming different combinations of x and y. So that's the standard economic problem that we usually study, and then we draw different indifference curves showing different combination of x and y, and then we will try to reach to the higher indifference curves, giving the higher level of utility, and then we'll try to draw the budget line and then try to find out the highest possible indifference curve where the budget line is tangent, and then we call it an optimal choice, and then point of tendency will define the amount of y and amount of x which will maximize the utility given the budget constraint. So that's the standard economic understanding of consumer equilibrium which we study in our micro textbook. Now let us introduce the kinship here and then see what will happen. So what happens when kinship is introduced as an explicit category? Till now there is no distinction between the individuals, whether they are male or female. There is no change in the assumptions for different individuals. All the individuals are conforming to the set of assumptions I have already mentioned, and then there is no sort of the understanding regarding the kinship relation so far. So if we introduce the kinship here in this model, which in India or in any other real societies, we will find that individuals do not control resources independently. Alright? Whenever kinship is introduced, we have the patriarchal authority, then there will be somebody who is deciding on others' behalf. There are gendered control over income, norms of governing consumption, that who is going to consume what in what way. There is an unequal bargaining power within the household, and also there is an altruism and coercion. For instance, suppose you can force somebody to have a particular combination by coercion, and at the same time your preference and choice not only related to your level of utility, but because of the kinship relations you can be satisfied by the others' consumption as well. So that's the kinship relation is all about, right? So therefore it is not only my preference or my utility that is to be maximized. My preference and my utility is also dependent on others' utility, which I love, which I relate to, and then whenever they are satisfied, I am also satisfied. So that is a kind of altruism. So it's no longer an individual choice, preference, utility, but it becomes a very complex set of relations. And whenever we have this kinship introduced in this form, the original assumptions are violated, and therefore the neoclassical model of optimality collapses. Let us see how major distortions take place moment we introduce kinship in this model. First is that income is not individually controlled. Your income entirely is not under your control. Hence the budget constraint is socially controlled, not individually controlled. So therefore your income, whether you will consume given the prices, is not entirely dependent on you, but it will be decided by the family or the household as a whole. So it is a collective decision rather than individual relation. Similarly, in the second place, in the patriarchal household, what will happen? That men will have the control over the income. Women's earning may be pooled or appropriated by men. For instance, suppose a working woman's income may be handed to the husband, and then husband will decide what is to be done with that income. Women cannot freely choose the consumption. Women's income may be used for family needs rather than for maximizing her personal utility and choices, and so on and so forth. So therefore patriarchy at play will distort the entire standard assumption, and then as a result of this the preferences will not be any more independent. Preferences are shaped by gender norms, and then family expectations, then social sanctions, and choice reflects the social pressure, not utility maximization really. So therefore whatever you prefer, whatever you choose, it is not your revealed preference as to say, but it will be sort of reflecting how you value socially different things and different acts, right? So this in a nutshell, this slide gives you a sort of a setting in the changes in the entire model. In the neoclassical model you have individual utility. In the kinship based model or reality situation, you have the household or family utility function. This is a collective utility function. It is no longer an individual utility function. In the neoclassical model, what you have independent choices, but in the kinship based model you will have the socially regulated choices, that what is to be done, what is to be choose is actually decided by the collective wisdom, cultural norm, and so on and so forth. In the neoclassical model, we believe that there is a full and equal access to resources, but kinship model will tell you that this is actually hugely gendered, that women do not control the resources as we are supposed to have. In the neoclassical model, for instance, the income is very personal and you have full control over your income. But in kinship-based model, more often than not, what you do, income is pooled and then controlled by the collective rather than individual. And then preference is exogenous in the neoclassical model, but in here, preferences are shaped by different norms and then culture. So there is an entire setting, which goes under change, and therefore your optimal question of the consumer choice does not hold true. And accordingly, we have to modify the formulation or articulation of the model as well. So we have, instead of the individual utility function, you have a household utility function like UH, which is a function of the male utility and the female utility, where weight of male will be or supposed to be greater than the weight of the female. So therefore, the male will dominate the utility function more. You have the budget as a household budget, not as an individual budget, which can be said as it's not about the prices and then goods anymore, but it will be your household income will be share of your male income and then share of the female income, and then share will be positive, but at the same time, it can be the zero for the women, and at the same time that is the coefficient of the male income is always going to be dominating the female income coefficient. And then when we introduce these two conditions into the model, then we will find that neoclassical optimality will collapse and will instead result in high utility for men relative to that of women. So that is for, that will result in gender inequality rather than the optimality. So that is the result that will come in if we introduce kinship as an explicit category. So in a nutshell, you will see that introduction of kinship will transform the choices to obligation, preferences to compulsion, and efficiency to inequality. So this is the result of introducing kinship into the consumption model. If we introduce the same thing into the production decision, same kind of the sequence will follow. The production decision will include the social obligation. Employment of labor as an input will continue till the social obligation is fulfilled. For instance, suppose if you go for the classical, neoclassical understanding, then you will find that the maximum or optimum utilization of labor will be the wage rate is equal to marginal productivity of labor. But here, the lot of inefficiency will come in because you will continue to employ your labor out of your social obligation or kinship relation, which will go beyond the point of equality between wage and marginal productivity of labor. So you will not stop there, even though that will give you the optimum result, but you will go on employing the labor out of your social obligation. As a result, the productivity will be lowered. There will be disguised unemployment, maybe, like in the most of the cases what we do. Why do we have the agriculture as something where we have the commonly, we get the disguised unemployment? Because the agriculture is an area where the household is engaged, whether it is required or not. It is out of social obligation, it is out of kinship, and that is why you have extra labor working in the agricultural fields. So there is a possibility of disguised unemployment, and as a result, efficiency and optimality will not hold good under such conditions. So you can go on and see that how neoclassical understanding of economic behavior and rationality gets transformed into something which is hugely inefficient and hugely problematic. In a sense, let us try to summarize that what we have discussed in this module. The first point that we need to understand that kinship is one of the foundational element of the social organization and social system. This week we have discussed more on social system and how it relates to gender relations. So we have understood that this is one of the foundational element of social system and social organization. Quite often, kinship relations are embedded in patriarchy, and then it influences the gender socialization and access to resources and economic opportunities of women. So since underlying the kinship relation, there is a strong deep-rooted element of patriarchy, domination of male over women. Therefore, we have the problem of the inequality of women coming up from this fact. Consequently, the kinship becomes a major source of gender inequality, which is not recognized in classical or neoclassical economic models. And then once kinship is explicitly brought to the analytical framework, it alters the economic rationality and choice. Consequently, neoclassical optimality collapses. And we have seen two cases, consumption choice and then production choice. And we have seen how in both the cases, all the assumptions gets violated, and then therefore you have the problem in terms of the optimality. And that is why understanding and recognizing kinship is extremely important in explaining gender inequality that we commonly observed in the society. So what is the point that we should take forward? That whenever we see gender inequality, we should not sit at the top and then observe only the symptom of it. There is a disease underlying the symptom, and that is we need to understand, and we have to go deep, and then we have to understand the different social structures and social system that produce the inequality that we observed on the surface. So with this, we conclude this today's model, and then we believe that this will be useful for your understanding the gender in terms of economics and development. Thank you.